had a good life living quietly with my mum in a small town. I grew up hearing stories about my dad who, according to Mum, had died a hero in a war when I was just 3. He loved me more than anything, she'd say. I never saw his pictures. They were lost, Mum told me, in a tragic fire. I loved our town. It was a simple life, but we had enough. Our own home, food on the table, and even some extras like vacation every once in a while. Then one day, everything changed. I received a phone call from the local hospital. The doctor's voice was grave, urgent. He said I needed to come in right away, so I did, and that's when my world was turned upside down. Sitting in his chilly office, I heard words that seemed to echo through my very soul. Your mother has advanced cancer, and she might have only 2 weeks left to live. I sat frozen, the room spinning as the foundation of my life crumbled around me. It was hard to believe, hard to accept that the life we shared was about to end so abruptly. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? We could have sold the house and gotten you the treatment you needed, I cried, my voice cracking with each word. To my surprise, my mother remained calm, more serene than I'd ever seen her before. Look, sweetheart, she began, her voice imbued with a gentle strength. My life has been full of joy. The moment I first held you in my arms, I knew without a doubt that you were the greatest blessing of my existence. That day shone brighter than any before it. Choosing to raise you, to share in every moment of laughter and every challenge, was the wisest and most rewarding decision I've ever made. We've shared so much joy, and I've cherished every second as your mother, she said with conviction. And I would never sell the house. I don't want you to struggle when I'm gone. When I learned I had cancer, it was already too late. I made my decision, and I know you'll understand someday, especially when you have your own children. I'm not going to apologise or ask for your forgiveness because I believe I did the right thing. My mother concluded with a gentle certainty. The funeral was modest, attended by only a few, but it was enough. After the funeral, I found myself at a loss. Life seemed hollow. The house a constant echo of my mother's presence. I spent several nights clutching her favourite dress. It made me cry even harder, and the pain was overwhelming. Life itself became unbearable. The town was too full of memories. Every corner, every street reminded me of her. I would break down in tears unexpectedly. I had never known nor ever imagined that life could feel so utterly devoid of meaning. Staying would have driven me mad. Eventually, I quit my job, sold the house and moved to Houston. I moved to Houston, found a cosy apartment in a charming neighbourhood not far from downtown. With enough money that came from selling the house, I had the luxury of not needing to work, which gave me some time to settle in and plan my next steps. But moving to Houston wasn't just about starting over. It was also about uncovering the truth about my father. Sweetheart, I said I wouldn't ask for your forgiveness, but please forgive me for this one lie, my mother had confessed softly. Confused, I listened intently, having no idea what she could mean. Then she dropped a bombshell. Your father is alive. His name is Graham Fletcher. He's a millionaire and lives in Houston. As I approached his office, a whirlwind of thoughts and scenarios swirled through my mind. Maybe he'll be thrilled to see me, I hoped or pondered. How will I even start explaining that I'm his daughter? Despite the lies, the affectionate stories my mother had told me about him filled my heart with a desire to meet him. My excitement mounted as I stood at the reception desk of his sleek office building. I came to see Mr. Fletcher, Graham Fletcher, I announced. The receptionist, polite yet firm, inquired, "Could I have your name, miss, and your appointment time?" When I mentioned I didn't have an appointment but was a family member, she replied, "I'm sorry, miss, but Mr. Fletcher is extremely busy. You need to have an appointment to see him." Disappointed, I was about to leave when I saw him entering the building. Seizing the moment, I approached him. "Excuse me, Mr. Fletcher, I apologise for stopping you, but I need to talk to you." He paused, offering a polite yet distant smile. "I'm sorry, miss, I'm quite busy right now. Please arrange an appointment and we can talk later. I really must go now," he said gently. Despite the dismissal, something compelled me to reveal my identity. "Graham, I'm your daughter. Can we talk now?" I blurted out. His response was immediate, but his smile seemed laced with irony. "Oh, really, I'm so happy, finally, I've found you," he exclaimed, though his tone suggested sarcasm. Confused and hurt, I stood frozen as he added, "You're my 23rd child this year. I'm used to people trying to deceive me for money, but I can see through your act. It's quite feeble." I was speechless, devastated by his harsh words. How could he say such things? This was not how I had envisioned our first meeting. His parting words jolted me back to reality. "Goodbye. I hope I'll never see you again," he said coldly, as he and the men with him laughed while stepping into the elevator. I don't recall how I got back to my apartment, but there I was, staring blankly out the window into nothingness. I was utterly alone. My mother's recent death had left a void, but today that void expanded. I realised that I had lost my father too, not to death, but to his cold indifference. I thought this was the worst day of my life, but little did I know there were more surprises waiting for me. As life moved on, I knew I had to keep busy, to do something, anything, to avoid falling into despair. I had left a job at a small-town bank to come here, and although finding a similar position could take time, I didn't have the luxury of waiting. At that moment, any job would do. Exhausted by the day's events, I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, unable to face another meal alone in my apartment, I ventured out. I stumbled upon a quaint cafe just around the corner. While having breakfast and watching people pass by, I wondered if any of them had lives as tumultuous as mine. Then across the street, I noticed a help wanted sign in a restaurant window. Taking a chance, I started working there as a hostess. The pay was negligible, but that didn't matter. I needed something to fill my days, to anchor me in the present. Surprisingly, the job turned out to be a blessing. The long hours kept me occupied, and chatting with customers helped the days pass more quickly. I found unexpected joy in these simple interactions. One evening, just before my shift ended, I noticed a family, a couple with a little girl, sharing laughter and smiles over their meal. It was a beautiful sight, yet it stung sharply. I couldn't help but wonder how different my life might have been if I had grown up with both my parents, knowing such happiness. Leaving work that day, a heavy cloud of depression hung over me. I wandered aimlessly, my feet leading me without direction, until I realised I was standing in the middle of a dimly lit alley. My heart sank as two men blocked my path. "Hey, beautiful, what are you doing here all alone?" one of them called out. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. I tried to walk past them without a word, but the other man stepped in front of me, blocking my way. "Hey, babe, where are your manners? We just wanted to talk, and you're acting like we don't even deserve a response," he taunted. His companion added, "You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. That's not very nice, girl." Panic rising, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Look, I'm meeting my boyfriend. He'll be here any minute." As I uttered those words, I unintentionally backed into someone standing right behind me. Startled, I stumbled but was caught by strong hands. Reacting instinctively, I seized the moment and blurted out to my harassers, "See, I told you, he's my boyfriend." Without a word, the newcomer struck the two men with swift, decisive blows, and they crumpled to the ground. "My love, let's get out of here," he said, with a hint of humour in his voice. Grateful and still shaking, I followed him out of the alley. Once we were safe, he turned to me with a smile. "Your boyfriend's name is Nolan, and what's my girlfriend's name?" he joked. In that moment, as I looked into his eyes, something shifted inside me. They say love at first sight doesn't exist, and I wasn't sure I'd ever believed in it. But there, under the streetlights, I felt myself falling for him, completely and irrevocably. He must have noticed it. "My love, wake up," he teased again with a chuckle. "Could you stop calling me my love?" I asked quietly, my tone more pleading than irritated. "Well, you did say I was your boyfriend, so I'm just playing the part," he replied, still joking. "I'm really sorry for dragging you into this mess, mister." I faltered, realising I hadn't caught his name. "Nolan, your boyfriend," he said, his smile unwavering. Surprisingly, I found myself enjoying his light-hearted banter, wishing the night would never end. He walked me to my apartment, playfully insisting that he couldn't let his girlfriend walk home alone so late at night. "Goodbye, my love, see you tomorrow," he called out as he departed. He left without a kiss and, more puzzling, he hadn't asked for my contact information. How could he possibly see me tomorrow? I pondered this as I sipped water back at my apartment. He didn't even know my name. His humour was charming, yet I wondered if it was a bit much. "See you tomorrow," he had said. How? That night, for the first time in a while, I fell asleep with a smile, replaying his words in my mind, not burdened by sadness. "Have you fallen in love, Lucy?" my co-worker asked, smiling. Maybe I was radiating my newfound feelings, or perhaps they were just used to seeing me sad. It didn't matter. My thoughts were consumed by Nolan. Would he actually come to find me, or was it all just playful banter? The day flew by, and evening came with no sign of him. As I headed home, I realised he might not come after all. Yet he lingered in my mind, changing the way I felt and acted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly being myself. Another day at work passed, and still Nolan hadn't come to find me. On my way home, I entertained the thought, maybe he'll be waiting at my building. He knows where I live, but he wasn't there either. The entire week was a cycle of hopeful mornings and disappointing evenings. I finally had to face the reality that he wasn't coming for me. On my day off Saturday, I went shopping. Even in the crowded mall, I found myself scanning faces, hoping against reason that I would see him. I scolded myself to stop this foolishness and decided to go to the cinema, half hoping to accidentally stumble upon him there. When I saw a man who looked like him from behind, my heart leapt. I couldn't restrain myself. I approached and greeted him. To my mortification, it wasn't Nolan, but a stranger. Embarrassed, I hurried home, my spirits deflated, thinking I must be going crazy for him. Sunday rolled around, and it was the same story, a quiet day filled with unmet expectations. As my shift at the restaurant was about to end, a waiter approached me. "There's an unhappy customer asking for you." I braced myself for a complaint, but instead there he was, Nolan, his familiar smile warming the room. "How have you been, my love?" he greeted. Caught off guard, all I could muster was a simple, "Good." "Please have a seat. We're going to have dinner together," he invited, his smile as inviting as ever. "Sorry, Nolan, I can't," I responded quickly. "You're a customer, and it's not appropriate for me to join you." "Relax, Lucy," he reassured, his grin broadening. "Your shift just ended, right? Now you can be a guest." "Wait, I don't remember telling you my name. Were you following me?" I asked, startled by his familiarity. I know, Lucy, let me explain. Would you join me for dinner tonight? Nolan's tone was serious this time, devoid of his usual jest. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. I won't lie to you, I've seen you around a few times before. You've even seated me at a table once. There's a gym nearby I recently started going to, and this place has become my new favourite. He hesitated, then added, Honestly, it became my favourite because of you. I kept coming back, hoping you'd notice me. And about that night, I was thrilled to finally meet you. Though I'm sorry for how things unfolded and for getting involved. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to act quickly to protect you. He paused, then continued. Today I spoke with your manager first and got permission. All your co-workers seemed to support my idea, which was simply to ask you out. As he concluded his explanation, a flutter of butterflies stirred in my stomach. I struggled to maintain my composure and managed a faint, nice story. That evening, we talked about everything and nothing at all. Have you ever had that feeling? You meet someone and instantly you click, as if you've been close friends all your life. That's how we felt. After hours of conversation, he insisted on taking a taxi with me to ensure I got home safely. Standing in front of my building, one question lingered, driven by a sudden nagging doubt. You didn't arrange for those two men to be a part of your plan, did you? He smiled reassuringly, yet his expression soon turned serious. No, it was purely coincidental, but I'm glad I was there. I can't imagine what might have happened otherwise. It felt as though some higher power was looking out for me, and as I pondered this, he leaned in and kissed me. I responded without hesitation, swept up in the moment. It was the most intense kiss I'd ever experienced. Our passion was undeniable, and we found ourselves intertwined beneath the soft glow of moonlight streaming through my apartment window. It was a night of profound connection and discovery, marking what felt like a new chapter in my life. Wrapped in each other's embrace, we explored the depths of our newfound affection, surrendering to the warmth and closeness that only such a night could bring. Over the following weeks, our relationship blossomed, and we became inseparable. My co-workers often remarked on how perfect we seemed together. Then one evening, Nolan took me to an upscale restaurant, a clear step up from our usual spots. As we enjoyed our conversation, he suddenly produced a small red case from his pocket. It was unmistakably a ring box. Just as he started to kneel, a voice interrupted him. Nolan, how are you, my son? The familiar voice chilled my blood. It was my father. And who is this young lady? He inquired as he approached our table. Upon seeing me, his demeanour shifted instantly. What the heck are you doing here? He demanded, his tone harsh and accusing. You couldn't get money from me, so now you're fooling around with my son? His voice rose with each word. Nolan stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face, but I was the most shaken. Nolan is your son? The room spun as the implication of my father's words sank in. The rest of my father's tirade became a distant blur as a horrifying realization dawned on me. I had slept with Nolan, with my brother. I thought I had finally found my happiness, but it turned out to be an illusion, worse than losing my mother or discovering the truth about my father's character. In a panic, I fled the restaurant and raced home. My phone buzzed relentlessly, Nolan's name flashing on the screen each time. With a heavy heart, I blocked his number. Staring at the ceiling, tears streamed down my face as I cried out in anguish. God, how could you do this to me? You took my mother, you exposed my father as a jerk. I could handle that, but why let me fall in love with my own brother? Why? The night dragged on, each hour marked by sobs and a profound grief I had never felt before. It felt like it would have been a mercy to just disappear. The next morning brought no relief. Nolan was outside ringing my doorbell incessantly. Desperate to avoid him, I slipped out the back door and made my way to work, where I quit my job on the spot. I knew I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. Everything there reminded me of the turmoil. My first stop was the phone store for a new number, one that Nolan would never know. Then, after a couple of nights in a hotel, I found a new apartment. Throughout it all, I was crumbling inside. I stopped looking in mirrors, feeling repulsed by my own reflection. As for what happened next, I only learned it later. Let's start with Nolan. Nolan shared his side of the story with me much later. That night at the restaurant, I was so angry with my dad. He ruined what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, my proposal, but then he threw me for a loop, suggesting that we might be siblings. I didn't know what to think or how to react. To make things even more confusing, he tried to convince me that you were just trying to scam us for money. He insisted those two guys were part of your plan and that you had set the whole thing up because you knew who I was. I couldn't listen to any more of his nonsense, so I left the restaurant and started calling you. When you didn't answer and eventually blocked me, I felt desperate. I went to your apartment but just couldn't bring myself to ring the bell. I walked around your building for the reason I didn't know all night aimlessly. When morning came and you still wouldn't answer the door, I felt lost. Then I remembered you telling me about your quest to find your father and that you came from a small town called Fredericksburg. That name stuck with me because it was so unique. I drove there hoping to find some trace of you, but you weren't there. I did meet a lady who knew your family, and I was shocked to learn the truth about my father's past with your mother. They had a fling back in the 90s when he was in town for work. He left and never looked back. I drove back home and confronted him. He finally admitted to his romance with Juliet, your mom. He even suggested that we find you and take a DNA test to see if we were related. The thought that you could actually be my sister was too much to handle. I was torn between wanting to know the truth and fearing it. Eventually, I couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. I left for Europe, trying to find some peace, but it never came. I felt like a zombie, just walking through life without really living. Nearly a month later, my dad called and told me to come home. I broke down and confessed everything to him over the phone. I said, "Dad, you have no idea what I've done. I was with my sister. I hate myself." But then he told me he had found you, conducted the DNA test, and we weren't related after all. He said I should come home right away. Hearing that we weren't siblings was such a relief. That was Nolan's story. He went from feeling the deepest despair to finally finding some peace, all while grappling with the fear of a truth too painful to imagine. Let me tell you about how I met my father for the third time. Apparently, he had hired a detective who managed to track me down at my new apartment. Work was the only thing keeping me somewhat grounded. At home, I was practically unravelling. So when my father showed up at my workplace, waiting outside as I finished my shift, I was shocked. This time he seemed different, a changed man. He pleaded with me to talk to him, begging me to come home so he could share his side of the story. But I refused, haunted by the chaos of our previous encounters. I blamed the day I ever met him and Nolan, wishing I had never been born. He persisted, almost begging, until I finally screamed at him, "You have no idea what I'm going through. Get lost. I don't want to see you, and don't remind me of Nolan. I wish we'd never met. You don't know how disgusting it feels, how disgusted I am with myself. I hate myself." He paused, finally seeming to grasp the depth of my anguish, and said, "I'm truly sorry. Look, I don't know if you're my daughter, but I can assure you that you're not related to Nolan. He's not your brother." His words, desperate for me to believe him, made me pause. I wanted to believe him so badly. Oh God, I hope you're not lying. I hope you're telling the truth. Eventually, I agreed to go with him, clinging to the promise that he would reveal everything, that the truth would finally come to light. We had already undergone a DNA test and were awaiting the results. The condition for revealing the truth about our relation, that I wasn't Nolan's sister, depended on that test. Well, I thought so. But at that point, I didn't care whether Graham was truly my father. All that mattered was confirming that Nolan was not my brother. Graham gathered us in the living room, his expression sombre as he prepared to unravel the past. I need to tell you about Fredericksburg, about your mother, Juliet, and how everything unfolded, he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I was supposed to be in Fredericksburg for just a week on a work trip, but then I met your mother. Right away, I knew she was special, so I extended my stay to spend more time with her. Those weeks turned into the highlight of my life. We were just doing regular couple things like dinners and movies, but with Juliet, every moment felt enchanted. Back then, I wasn't the wealthy man I am now. I was just a regular guy who had fallen in love with the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We shared many firsts. Our first dinner, our first movie, our first kiss, and our first night together. We even started dreaming about our future together, talking about names for our kids. Sophie if it was a girl, Nolan if a boy. When it was time for me to leave, I promised her I'd come back. He sighed deeply, the weight of his next words apparent. But life doesn't always go as planned. My return got delayed over and over, and eventually I just never made it back to her. Graham's tone shifted as he brought us to the present. Recently, when the detective was searching for you, Lucy, and while Nolan was in Europe trying to find peace, I realised I needed to understand what had happened to Juliet after I left. I went back to Fredericksburg, not to revisit old memories, but to seek out the truth, to understand the pain you both might be going through. I found Juliet's friend, and she filled in the blanks. Juliet was pregnant when I left, and she waited for me, hoping I'd return as promised. But as the weeks turned to months, she felt abandoned, thinking I'd played with her feelings. Out of her hurt, she named you Lucy instead of Sophie. Graham looked at us both, his eyes filled with regret. The truth is, after I left Fredericksburg, my life took unexpected turns. My best friend, Jacob, fell critically ill around that time. He was like a brother to me, and before he passed, he made me promise to look after his wife, Hannah, who was pregnant. I kept that promise, supported Hannah through her pregnancy, and eventually we married. Nolan, you are Jacob's biological son, and not mine by blood. And Lucy, you truly are my daughter. I'm profoundly sorry for not being there when you needed me, and for the confusion and pain I caused. Graham paused, his voice heavy with emotion as he addressed us both. I can't begin to express how sorry I am for the pain you've both endured because of my actions, or rather my inactions. All this confusion, this heartache, it traces back to my decisions, and for that I am truly sorry. Lucy, you are my daughter. Graham took a deep breath, the weight of his words palpable in the room. I had no idea, Lucy, that you even existed, that you were my daughter. Discovering this truth has shaken me to the core, and I'm overwhelmed with regret for all the years we've lost. The pain and confusion you've been through, it's unfathomable, and I take full responsibility for it. And I missed out on so much as well, and I'm asking now, can we start over? Please give me a chance to be the father I never knew I could be. He then looked towards Nolan, his expression filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. And Nolan, my boy, The fact that you are not my biological son changes nothing for me. You are my son, the one I've raised, loved, and cherished. You mean everything to me, and I hope to continue being the father you've always known." After all the confusion and the painful revelations, things began to settle down. Graham and I started over, and to my surprise, he turned out to be a good father. Despite the years we lost, he made every effort to make up for lost time. He was there for me, not just in words, but in actions, showing up when I needed him, listening to my stories and sharing his own. We built a bond I never imagined possible, one that grew stronger with each passing day. After all the confusion and the emotional revelations, Graham suggested something that initially took us by surprise. He proposed that Nolan and I should get married. His support and reassurance that it was okay for us to tie the knot, despite the complex way we had come to know each other, meant the world to us. And deep down we both knew that nothing would keep us apart, that we loved each other no matter what. Embracing this new chapter, Nolan and I decided to get married in a small but beautiful ceremony. It was a joyful celebration. Graham shared our relief and happiness, and it felt like a fresh start for all of us. Nolan turned out to be everything I could have wished for in a partner. He was kind, understanding, and above all, he loved me unconditionally. We promised to face whatever life threw at us together, holding on to each other no matter what. In the end, despite the tumultuous path that led us here, I found happiness. I found a family in the truest sense of the word. Graham, Nolan and I, we overcame the odds and built a life filled with love and laughter. Looking back, I wouldn't change a thing because it led me here to this perfect moment. And that's my story. A story of unexpected turns, of discovering love and family in the most unlikely places. It's a reminder that sometimes even the most complicated paths can lead to the happiest endings. Love this story? Give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more, and turn on that notification bell not to miss next story. Have a beautiful day.